GDP is the most widely used metric for measuring a country's economic performance and standard of living. It provides a comprehensive snapshot of a nation's economic activities. GDP serves as a barometer of a country's overall prosperity. It allows us to track the growth and health of a nation's economy over time. Understanding GDP is crucial for policymakers, businesses, and individuals to make informed decisions. The GDP figure is closely watched by economists, investors, and the general public as an indicator of a country's economic strength. GDP, or gross domestic product, is the total monetary value of all the finished goods and services produced within a country's borders over a specific time period. GDP measures the overall economic activity and production in a country, serving as a key indicator of a nation's economic health and growth. It includes the market value of all final goods and services, such as consumer goods, investment goods, government services, and net exports. The graph on this slide shows GDP growth over time, broken down by different economic sectors. This data provides insights into the composition and drivers of a country's economic output. Understanding GDP is crucial for policymakers, businesses, and individuals to make informed decisions about the economy. Gross domestic product, or GDP, is the total value of all the finished goods and services produced within a country's borders over a year. It's the primary measure of a nation's overall economic activity and productivity. The slide shows the components that make up GDP and how it is calculated. GDP provides an important snapshot of a country's economic health and performance. GDP is the primary metric used to measure the overall size and growth of a country's economy. It tracks the total value of goods and services produced. GDP per capita allows for comparisons of economic development and living standards between countries. This reveals disparities and trends over time. GDP is calculated by summing consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. This provides insight into the makeup of economic activity in a country. GDP is a comprehensive metric that reflects the overall size and health of a country's economy, providing insights into a nation's standard of living and economic growth. Governments use GDP data to make informed decisions about fiscal and monetary policies, helping to steer the economy towards greater stability and prosperity. GDP allows for cross-country comparisons, enabling policymakers and analysts to benchmark economic performance and identify areas for improvement. Investors and businesses use GDP data to assess the overall economic climate and make informed decisions about where to allocate resources and capital. GDP, or gross domestic product, is a key measure of a country's economic output and prosperity. Higher GDP generally indicates greater economic well-being and a higher standard of living for citizens. This is because higher GDP means more resources and income available to spend on things like healthcare, education, and other social services. However, GDP alone doesn't tell the whole story. It doesn't account for factors like inequality, environmental impact, or personal happiness. So while GDP is an important metric, we have to look at other indicators as well to get a full picture of a country's overall development and societal well-being. The three main approaches to calculating GDP are the expenditure, income, and production approaches. The expenditure approach adds up all the spending on final goods and services, including consumer spending, business investment, government spending, and net exports. The income approach calculates GDP by adding up all the income earned by individuals and businesses, such as wages, rent, interest, and profits. The production approach sums the value added at each stage of production for all industries, which represents the total market value of all final goods and services produced. These three methods should all arrive at the same GDP figure, as they are measuring the same economic activity from different angles. Understanding the different GDP calculation approaches helps provide a more complete picture of economic activity and output. GDP is calculated by adding up spending across four main components: consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Consumption refers to spending by households on goods and services. Investment refers to spending on capital goods by businesses. Government spending includes spending by federal, state, and local governments. Net exports is the difference between exports and imports. This expenditure approach provides a comprehensive view of total demand in the economy. By looking at these four components, we can get a full picture of economic activity and growth. GDP can be calculated using the income approach, which sums up the different types of income earned within the country. The main components are compensation of employees, wages, salaries, and benefits paid to workers, gross operating surplus, profits earned by businesses and corporations, mixed income, income from self-employment and small businesses. This provides an alternative to the expenditure-based calculation of GDP, which looks at total spending in the economy. The income approach gives insight into how income is distributed across different groups in the economy. The production approach to calculating GDP measures the total value of goods and services produced within a country's borders during a specific time period. Key economic sectors that contribute to GDP include agriculture, manufacturing, construction, utilities, transportation, retail, finance, and government services. For each sector, the value added, sales minus intermediate costs, is calculated, and these values are summed to arrive at the total GDP. Final adjustments are made to account for taxes on products and subsidies, resulting in the official GDP figure. This infographic provides a visual overview of the steps involved in the production approach to GDP calculation. GDP per capita provides a better indication of a country's standard of living compared to just looking at overall GDP. GDP per capita can vary significantly between nations, with developed economies typically having much higher values than developing countries. This metric helps illustrate disparities in wealth and quality of life around the world. The GDP per capita chart on this slide visually demonstrates these differences between countries. I'll use this data to highlight the economic and development gaps that exist globally. Real GDP measures the total value of goods and services produced in a country, adjusted for inflation. This provides a more accurate picture of economic growth over time. Nominal GDP, on the other hand, measures the total value of goods and services without adjusting for inflation. It reflects the current price level in the economy. Real GDP is considered a better indicator of economic performance as it removes the distorting effects of inflation. Nominal GDP is still useful for comparing current economic figures. The key difference is that real GDP gives us a sense of the actual volume of economic activity, while nominal GDP shows the total dollar value, which can be influenced by price changes. Understanding the distinction between real and nominal GDP is important for accurately assessing a country's economic health and growth over time. The GDP growth rate is a crucial metric for understanding a country's economic performance. Over the past decade, the average annual GDP growth rate in the US has been 4.7%. In the most recent quarter, the real GDP growth rate, adjusted for inflation, was 2.9%. Economic projections indicate a forecasted GDP growth rate of 3.2% for the upcoming year. During the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, the US experienced a sharp drop in GDP of -2.5%. Analyzing GDP growth trends provides valuable insights into the overall health and direction of the economy. GDP is a limited measure of economic activity and well-being. It focuses solely on economic output, ignoring factors like environmental sustainability, social welfare, and income inequality. GDP excludes unpaid domestic labor, volunteer work, and other non-market activities that contribute to society. GDP can be manipulated by governments or companies to present a more favorable economic picture. Higher GDP does not necessarily mean a better quality of life. It fails to capture factors like happiness, health, and personal fulfillment. GDP is a widely used metric, but it has significant limitations in measuring true progress and well-being. One major criticism is that it ignores the environmental impact of economic activities, failing to account for the depletion of natural resources and the damage caused to the environment. GDP growth can also mask increasing wealth disparity within a society, as it does not reflect how wealth is distributed. Additionally, GDP excludes the value of unpaid labor, such as household chores and caregiving, which are vital to societal well-being. Finally, GDP focuses solely on quantitative measures and fails to capture the qualitative aspects of progress, such as happiness, health, and education. These limitations highlight the need to explore alternative measures that provide a more holistic view of a country's development and the well-being of its citizens. GDP growth can have significant environmental impacts, so it's crucial that we measure and account for the effects on natural resources and ecosystems. Shifting to a circular economy model that reuses and recycles resources can help decouple economic growth from environmental degradation. Incorporating sustainability metrics alongside GDP can help ensure that economic progress is balanced with social and environmental well-being for long-term prosperity. The image of the lush, sustainable forest environment sets the tone for the importance of considering environmental factors alongside economic factors. GDP growth doesn't always translate to broad-based prosperity. It can mask the concentration of wealth among a small segment in many countries. GDP expansion has coincided with rising income inequality, where the gains disproportionately benefit the top earners. GDP is a poor measure of societal well-being as it fails to account for the unequal distribution of income and wealth. Policymakers must focus on promoting inclusive economic growth that benefits all segments of the population, not just the affluent. The pursuit of economic growth, as measured by GDP, often comes at a significant environmental cost, including pollution, resource depletion, and habitat destruction. Relying solely on GDP as a metric of progress ignores the long-term sustainability of economic activities and their impact on the planet's health. There is a growing call to move beyond GDP and incorporate environmental, social, and well-being factors into measures of economic and societal progress. Achieving a balance between economic growth and environmental protection is crucial for long-term prosperity and the well-being of current and future generations. GDP alone is an incomplete measure of a society's well-being. Strong social connections, civic participation, and a sense of belonging are vital aspects of societal prosperity that GDP fails to capture. Family bonds, personal relationships, and quality time together are key components of individual and societal well-being that GDP does not reflect. GDP growth can come at the expense of work-life balance, leisure, and personal fulfillment, factors that contribute to overall societal well-being. We need to look beyond just GDP to understand the true prosperity and well-being of a society. GDP, or gross domestic product, is a widely used metric for measuring a country's economic output and growth. However, it has been criticized for not capturing important aspects of societal well-being and sustainable development. This slide explores three alternative approaches that aim to provide a more comprehensive assessment of a nation's progress and prosperity. First, there are initiatives that measure environmental sustainability and the impact of economic activities on the natural environment. These frameworks promote sustainable development as a key indicator of a country's overall health. Second, we have approaches that focus on measuring happiness, life satisfaction, and holistic human development. These go beyond just economic output to assess societal well-being. Finally, the concept of inclusive wealth considers a broader range of assets, including natural, human, and social capital, to gauge a nation's true wealth and long-term prosperity. These alternatives to GDP offer a more nuanced and balanced perspective on a country's progress, helping policymakers and citizens make more informed decisions about the future. Inclusive wealth is a comprehensive measure of a country's total wealth, including natural, human, and produced capital. It provides a more holistic view of a nation's sustainability and long-term well-being, beyond just GDP. Preserving and growing all forms of capital, natural, human, and produced, is key for sustainable development. Inclusive wealth also aims to capture the equitable distribution of wealth to ensure development benefits all segments of the population. This metric gives policymakers a more complete picture to guide decisions that promote long-term prosperity and environmental protection. Life satisfaction looks at an individual's overall satisfaction with their life, considering factors like relationships, accomplishments, and general well-being. Subjective well-being assesses a person's emotional experiences, including positive and negative feelings, to gauge their overall happiness and quality of life. The eudaimonic approach focuses on the realization of human potential and the pursuit of meaningful, virtuous activities that lead to a sense of purpose. These three concepts provide different lenses for measuring and understanding an individual's happiness and life satisfaction. As we explore these topics, we'll discuss how they can be applied to better understand and improve people's overall well-being. The Human Development Index, HDI, is a composite statistic that measures a country's average achievements in three key areas: health, education, and standard of living. HDI provides a more comprehensive view of a country's development than just looking at economic output measured by GDP. The equality-adjusted HDI also accounts for inequality within a country, adjusting the index downward to reflect unequal distribution of human development. The multidimensional poverty index looks beyond just income levels, measuring acute deprivations in health, education, and living standards to give a more detailed picture of poverty. These measures help us understand human development in a more holistic way, beyond just economic indicators. Developed economies like the US and Western Europe typically have a higher GDP due to advanced technology, infrastructure, and industries that drive productivity and economic growth. Developing economies such as China and India often have a lower GDP per capita, but are experiencing rapid growth as they industrialize and integrate into the global economy. The composition of GDP also differs, with developed economies relying more on services, while developing economies have larger agricultural and manufacturing sectors. Developing economies face unique challenges, like poverty, income inequality, and environmental degradation, that can impact GDP growth and sustainability. GDP data is a crucial input for policymakers as they develop fiscal and monetary policies to manage economic growth, employment, and inflation. Tracking GDP growth rates helps governments assess the overall health of the economy and identify areas that may require intervention or stimulus. GDP data provides businesses and investors with valuable insights to guide their investment strategies and decisions about resource allocation. GDP comparisons between countries help inform international trade agreements and negotiations, as well as decisions about tariffs and other trade policies. As we've seen, GDP has significant limitations as a measure of national prosperity and well-being. It fails to capture important factors like environmental sustainability, income inequality, and overall quality of life. Policymakers and economists are now exploring alternative metrics that can provide a more holistic view of a country's development and the welfare of its citizens. These new approaches aim to incorporate a wider range of social, environmental, and economic indicators to better reflect the true state of a nation's prosperity. Moving forward, a more comprehensive understanding of national progress will be crucial as economies and societies continue to evolve in complexity. Adopting these expanded measures can help guide policymaking and ensure sustainable development that improves overall societal well-being.